All right, let's dive in. We're going to talk about the hidden power of language. And I mean how the words we use don't just describe our world, they literally create it. And our story? Well, it starts with a very, very unlikely figure.
So, let's go back to May 28, 2016. A gorilla named Harambe is shot and killed at the Cincinnati Zoo after a little boy falls into his enclosure. I mean, a tragedy, right? Absolutely. But what happened next? That's where things get really bizarre. This one event, it just spiraled into something way, way bigger.
Because online, the whole story just transformed. Harambe wasn't just an animal anymore. He became a symbol. People started saying things like he died for our sins. I mean, can you believe that? They were framing his death in this weird, almost religious way. He wasn't a gorilla anymore. He was an idea.
And get this idea had real-world consequences. During the U.S. presidential election that same year, an estimated 15,000 people, 15,000, wrote Harambe on their ballots. So, how does that even happen? How does a real event get so completely twisted and rewritten that it actually starts to influence politics? Well, the answer? It's all about something called the symbolic power of language.
Okay, so to really get our heads around this, let's first get the facts straight. Let's do a quick recap of what actually went down that day in Cincinnati. So, you've got the incident itself, right? The terrible decision the zookeepers had to make, and then this huge public debate. But the story didn't stop there, not even close. The internet took over, and the real-life Harambe was basically replaced by Harambe the meme, a symbol that can mean anything to anyone. And this is really our first big clue as to how a real story can get hijacked and just completely rewritten. You see, this whole Harambe thing isn't just some weird internet story. It's actually a perfect example of a really deep concept called symbolic power. And that's the theory that explains how our entire reality is basically built with words.
This idea comes from a sociologist named Pierre Bourdieu. And symbolic power, it's basically the ability to make people see and believe in a certain version of the world. It's not about using physical force or anything like that. It's all about shaping reality through words, through stories, getting all of us to accept one particular version of things as just normal, as natural.
So think of it like this. There are two types of language. On the one hand, you've got what's called instrumental language. Super straightforward. The wall is made of concrete. It's just a fact, right? But then you have symbolic language. A phrase like, I will build a great wall, well, that doesn't just state a plan. It builds an entire world of feelings, of complex ideas.
I mean, just think about it for a second. That one word, wall, it triggers this whole cascade of ideas in our minds. Linguists actually have a name for this. They call it an idealized cognitive model. It stops being about a physical barrier, doesn't it? It becomes about who's inside and who's outside. Protection versus invasion. And at its core, it's about us versus them. That right there, that's symbolic power in action. One single word creating an entire worldview. And here's the thing. This is not a new phenomenon at all. Manipulating reality with words is a trick that's as old as stories themselves. Let's look at a couple of classic examples to see what I mean. Okay, you probably know this fable, the wolf and the lamb. A wolf wants to eat a lamb, but instead of just, pouncing, he tries to build a reality where his violence is totally justified. The moral of the story is pretty cynical, but it's powerful. Power doesn't actually need to be right, it just needs a really good story. And the wolf, he has a whole playbook. First, he frames the situation so he's in charge. Then, he makes a completely false accusation. He even plays the victim card to make himself seem like he's the one being wronged. And finally, he uses the language of justice to make his brutal attack seem legitimate. He's literally constructing a reality where eating the lamb isn't murder, it's a justified punishment. And this strategy isn't just for fables either. Let's jump over to 19th century Germany. There was this super popular children's book that used stories to enforce social norms. And believe me, the methods were, they were intense. So this line here, it's from a story about a boy who won't brush his hair or cut his nails, and parents would read this out loud and actually encourage their own kids to join in on the shaming chant, "Pfui," which is basically like saying, yuck, gross. The goal here wasn't just to punish the messy kid in the book. No, it was to make the child who was listening identify with the group doing the shaming, to reinforce that social rule. And this is the key insight right here. The real punishment in these stories wasn't the scary stuff, like a kid burning to death or getting his thumbs cut off. The ultimate threat was symbolic. It was social death. It was the fear of being shamed. of being cast out of the community. The stories were using the threat of physical violence to inflict a much, much deeper symbolic violence.
Okay, so these tricks are ancient, right? But our modern world, and especially our digital world, has put them on steroids. Seriously, the lines between what's real and what's symbolic have never, ever been blurrier.
Check this out. In 2016, the exact same year the Harambe meme exploded, the use of the word post-truth spiked by 2,000%. 2,000! That is not a coincidence. It signals a huge shift in how we relate to reality, a shift where the story can become way more important than the actual facts.
There's a word for this. The philosopher Jean Baudrillard called it hyperreality. It's that bizarre state where the simulation, the copy, becomes more real than the original thing itself. And just think about it. Harambe the meme became so much more real and influential than Harambe the actual gorilla ever was. Our digital lives, our online personas, they can start to feel even more significant than our physical reality.
And this hyper-real world we're living in, it is fertile ground for all kinds of symbolic manipulation. You've got trolls, whose only goal is to get an emotional reaction out of you. You've got fake news, which is just trying to deliberately deceive people. Propaganda wants to build your allegiance to an ideology. But disinformation campaigns, man, their goal can be the most insidious of all. It's not always to convince you of a lie. Sometimes it's just to make you doubt that truth even exists, to completely erode trust and just muddy the waters.
So the big question is, in a world where reality itself can be constructed and manipulated, what do we do? How do we navigate all this? Are we just supposed to be passive consumers of all these stories? Well, this final part is all about how we can actually push back.
A thinker named Michel de Certeau gave us a really useful way to think about this. He drew a line between strategies and tactics. So strategies, those are the tools of the powerful. Think institutions, governments, big media corporations. They're the ones who create the systems and define the official reality. But tactics are the clever moves of everyday people. They're the arts of the weak, used to navigate inside that system, to resist it, and to reinterpret it.
And this is where it all comes full circle, back to Harambe. That meme, in all of its absurdity, you can see it as a tactic. It took the official story, a tragic zoo incident, and completely repurposed it. It turned it into a joke, a symbol of protest, a commentary on media craziness. Tactics are like the guerrilla warfare of symbolic power. They're these small, creative, and totally unpredictable acts that challenge the main story from the inside.
And that really brings us to the final critical question. Language isn't just for talking. It's the battleground where our reality is fought over and defined. Every story we accept, every meme we share, it all shapes our world. So the key is just to be aware of this incredible power, to always be asking, who is telling this story? What kind of world are they trying to build with their words? And maybe most importantly, in this world made of symbols, who is writing your story?